Hi boys, we're going to look at simple quadratic equations today. So we're going to move on from linear equations. Now, quadratic equations are equations where the highest power of the variable is 2. Okay? Now, quadrat means squared in Latin. So Latin is a very old language. It's not used anymore, but the word quadrat means squared. So a quadratic equation is an equation with a squared term in it. And in fact, the highest power in the quadratic equation is a squared term. So if you have a look at these examples down here, this is a quadratic equation because we have the highest power of x is 2. This is also a quadratic equation because the highest power of x is 2. And all of these are also quadratic equations because the highest power of the pronumeral is 2. Now, you have seen quadratic equations before because we've done Pythagoras' theorem. You can see there the highest power of the pronumerals is 2 there. Now, here are examples of equations which are not quadratic. So here, for example, 3x minus 2 equals 5. That's a linear equation, and the highest power of x in that equation is 1, so that's not quadratic. For this one here, even though we do have a squared term, the highest power of x in this equation is 3, so that's not a quadratic equation. All right. Now let's have a look at some examples. So we're going to solve these quadratic equations. So the first one here is y squared equals 16. So you've got to think of a number which when you square it, you're going to get 16. So definitely one number is 4. So 4 squared equals 16. And another number which when we square it to get 16 is also negative 4. So negative 4 in brackets is also equal to 16. So that means we can write down that y is equal to positive 4 and also negative 4. All right, so there's two answers to this quadratic equation, a positive answer and a negative answer. Now, the way we abbreviate those two answers, so we write down y is equal to positive and negative 4. Okay, so positive 4 and negative 4 are the two answers. So this is how we write that down. Now, your equations won't always be that easy to guess. The formal way of setting these out is to write the equation down. Okay. And what you're going to do next is do the opposite of squaring. Okay, the opposite of squaring is square rooting, so we're going to square root both sides. Now, you have to remember when you do this, because there's always a positive and negative answer, you have to remember to put the plus and the minus in front of the square root. Okay, now the square root undoes the power of 2, so you just get y equals. The plus and the minus sign have to remain there because we know there's two answers. And the square root of 16, you can put that into your calculator or just work it out mentally. That's just 4. So this here in the second column is a formal way of setting them out. So that's why we're going to be doing those. What I'd like you to do is pause the video and have a go at the hashtag example over here. Okay, now video is unpaused, so solving this formally, I write the question out again. Okay, and now I'm going to find the square root of both sides. So square root there, square root there. Don't forget to put the plus and the minus symbol in front of the square root. And then we're going to write down our answer. Now the square root undoes the power of 2. That's the whole point of doing it in the first place. You need to keep your plus or minus there. And then square root of 81 is 9. Okay, make sure you copy that down into your books. All this should be copied down. Okay, let's have a look at another one. Now, we've got 5a squared is equal to 245. So let's just write the question down again so we can write on top of it. We're going to solve these like we normally do. We want to get the a by itself, if you like. So the first thing we're going to do is divide by 5. Okay, that'll cancel. Right. And now we've done that, we've got the a squared term by itself. So we're going to write down a squared equals, so if you work this out, 245 divided by 5, that is 49. Okay, and then the next step after that is we want to square root it. So we're going to square root, and don't forget to put the plus or minus because there's two answers, remember? And then that's going to give us a equals plus or minus 7. All right, so if I put 7 into this equation and square it and then times by 5, I get 245. If I put negative 7 into this equation, square it, just be aware though, when you're checking your answers, this is how I do the negative 7. I'd go on my calculator 5 times, and I have to use the brackets here because of the negative, right? If you put in 5 times brackets negative 7 squared, you will get 245. Okay, so that's the check to see if the answer works. All right, pause the video, and I want you to have a go at the hashtag question here. Okay, so how did you go? Right, I'm just going to write the question out again. Okay, now, first things first, we're going to divide by 2, because I want to get the, don't forget there's a times sign between those two, that's why I'm dividing by 2. The opposite of times 2 is divide 2. So divide both sides by 2, that cancels. We're left with p squared equals 144. Okay, now to get rid of the squared part of the equation, we need to do the opposite of squaring, which is square rooting. Okay, so square root both sides, and do not forget to put the plus and minus symbol. Now, the plus and minus symbol has to be in there as soon as you use the square root. You can't just put it in at the end. Okay, now the square root gets rid of the power of 2. So p is equal to plus or minus. Now, root 144 is just 12. Okay. All right, make sure that's copied down. Now, let's have a look at some other questions here. So we are going to do a different kind of question now. Now, notice we got 2p squared plus 3 equals 21. Now, the plus 3 is by itself. So I'm going to subtract 3 first from both sides. That's going to give me 2p squared is equal to 18. Okay. Now, I've got to get rid of that times 2. This is 2 times p squared. The opposite of times 2 is divide by 2. Cancel. That's going to give you p squared is equal to 9. Right? And then the last step, you're going to square root both sides, plus and minus, and final answer, p is equal to plus or minus 3. Okay, copy that down. I want you to have a go at the hashtag example now. So pause the video and see how you go with this one. Okay, so we're going to add 4 to both sides. So it gives me 5x squared is equal to 245. And then next step is we're going to divide by 5. Divide by 5. Cancel. And that will give you x squared is equal to, now get your calculator out, 245 divided by 5. It's going to give you 49. Okay, and then you're going to square root both sides. Don't forget the plus or minus symbol. And that's x equals plus or minus 7 as your final answer. How did you go? Okay, let's have a look at some other examples now. Now, some quadratic equations do not have whole numbers as solutions. So let's have a look at these ones. So I'll do the first one. So for this one here, let's write the question out again. In fact, we're going to have one decimal place in our answer. Okay, so first things first, divide by 4. Divide by 4, cancels. X squared. It's going to give you 150. Okay, and next step, square root both sides. Don't forget to put the plus and minus symbol there. Now, on your calculator, you're going to put in the square root of 150, and to one decimal place, that'll be 12.2. Now, because we are approximating the answer by cutting off all the other decimal places, you should use the approximation symbol. And you do that by putting a dot above and below the equal sign. Okay, copy that down, pause the video, and I want you to have a go at the hashtag example here. Okay, so let's see how you went. So 3h squared on 5, I'm just going to write the question down again. Now I want to get rid of the fraction first. So what I'm going to do is times by 5, times by 5, that cancels. Okay, now the next step will be 3h squared is equal to, now what's 26 times 5? That's 130. Right, so the next step there is to get rid of the 3 next to the h squared term. So divide by 3 both sides, divide by 3 both sides, cancel, cancel. That's going to give you h squared is equal to, that's 43.3 recurring. Right. So the next step is to square root both sides. Now, because it doesn't simplify to a nice number, I would rub that out, and instead I'd leave it as 130 on 3. So when I do my square root, I'm actually going to square root the fraction. This will give me a more accurate answer. Don't forget the plus or minus. So you're going to get h equals plus or minus, and you should get 6.58, which to one decimal place is 6.6. Okay, and don't forget to do the approximation symbol because you're rounding. Okay, now some questions will ask you for the exact solution, and they might also ask you to leave the answer in surd form. That means to leave it as a square root, and the reason they do that is because the solution doesn't simplify to a nice whole number or a nice rational number. So let's have a look at this question here. We're going to find the exact solution, so we're going to leave our answer as a square root. So let's write the question down again. Okay, now I'm going to divide both sides by 3. That cancels. Gives me x squared equals 5. Now 5, when I square root, it does not simplify to a nice number. Get a whole lot of decimals. So when I do my square root here, I'm going to just leave it as the square root of 5. Now that number there, root 5, is called a surd. And plus or minus the square root of 5 is my exact answer. This is the exact answer. Okay, because we haven't rounded it to one decimal place, so that's the exact answer. So what I'd like you to do now is to copy that down, have a go at the hashtag example, pause the video. Okay, so let's see how you went. So plus 3 to both sides. It's going to give you k squared is equal to 65, and then square root both sides. Don't forget to put the plus or minus there, and then k is equal to plus or minus. Now, because we're writing the exact answer, if you put in the square root of 65 on your calculator, you're going to get 8.06225 and so on. It doesn't simplify to a nice whole number, so we're just going to leave it as the exact answer because that's what the question says to do. So that's my answer, k equals plus or minus 365. Now, just to finish off, make sure that's all copied down, of course. Some quadratic equations have no solution. So this is an example of that. So if we try and solve this, x squared equals negative 4, and I'll do the square root, both sides. If you try this on your calculator, right, x equals, okay, in fact, you'll get an error on the calculator. So there's no solution because you can't find the square of a negative number. Okay, no solution since you can't find the square root of a negative number. Okay, so why can't you find the square root of a negative number? It was because whenever you square a number, you either get a 0 result or a positive. So let's say if I square positives, if I square 7, I get 49. Actually, let's just do 2's. If I square 2, I get 4. If I square negative 2, and I've got to use the brackets if I'm squaring, I also get positive 4. So there is no number which when I square it, where I'll get a negative result. So that's why you can't find the square root of a negative number. So anytime you get a negative number inside the square root sign, you're going to have no solution. Okay, and that's it for today.